I got mixed feelings with that part of my life.
Right,
You
right,
know, what I
right,
mean? A lot of stuff about that I don't like about myself and stuff.
right.
I try to forget that stuff.
Left and right. Tyson clips him with the left hand. Look at this. Combination. And Berman ready to didn't go down in the first round. But he's been stacking. Let's listen into the corner. Mike Tyson. Tyson goes away.
By the time Mike Tyson was 22 years old, he had already fought 35 professional bouts, won 35. And the terrifying part? It wasn't that he kept winning. It was why men stopped wanting to fight him. Promoters were making calls and getting hung up on. Managers were turning down money, good money. Champions, actual world champions, were finding reasons not to sign. A torn rotator cuff, a scheduling conflict, a contract dispute, any excuse, any reason, anything to avoid 4 letters. Tyson. This is the story of how a 22-year-old kid from Brownsville, Brooklyn, didn't just become heavyweight champion of the world, he became something
different. And this was because Tyson's numerous point deductions, mixed with some dominant moments for Ruddock, put into question exactly who
boxing had never seen before. Something so dangerous. The sport itself ran out of willing participants. To understand what Tyson became at 22, you have to understand what he was at 13, juvenile delinquent, street fighter, a kid the system had already written off. He'd been arrested over 30 times by the time he was a teenager. Then a corrections officer named Bobby Stewart noticed something in the boy. Not discipline, not focus, not even talent, just rage. Raw, barely contained, primal rage.
This is round one, what just underway. Speaks not able to hold him off so far with a jab. He tries to come back at him, but Tyson walks right through it. Tyson showing no fear, no...
Stewart introduced him to a 70-year-old trainer named Cus D'Amato. And Cus D'Amato looked at Mike Tyson and said something that would define the next decade of boxing. That's the heavyweight champion of the world, if he wants to be. D'Amato wasn't just a trainer.
Very effective and very damaging. Now watch the left hook to the temple, to the forehead. Now that's power.
You think so?
I know so.
He was an architect. He had already built 2 world champions, Floyd Patterson and Jose Torres. But he'd never had material like this. Tyson moved into D'Amato's house in Catskill. Trained 6 days a week, watched fight films obsessively. Jack Dempsey, Joe Louis, Rocky Marciano, Willie Pep. He didn't just watch them, he absorbed them, and Cus built him a style to match. The peekaboo defense, gloves high, chin tucked, constant head movement. It looked awkward, almost amateur, until you realized what it was designed for, to get you close, fast, without getting hit. And once Tyson got close, the fight was over. Tyson turned professional in March of 1985. He was 18 years old. But let's back up, because the amateur record alone tells you something was different. In amateur competition, Tyson went up against fighters who were older, more experienced, decorated. He lost twice to a man named Henry Tillman, the same Henry Tillman who would go on to win gold at the 1984 Los Angeles Olympics. But here's the thing about those losses.
Is to at least clear your head, or either to
Been talking to some of the people he fought.
look at here.
Just left me ready to be doing all the wrong things.
Judges gave those fights to Tillman. Fighters knew something different was happening. Because Tyson wasn't just hitting hard. He was hitting with a precision that didn't belong to a teenager. Short hooks to the body. Overhand rights timed to a slipping movement. Uppercuts thrown from angles that shouldn't have worked. He turned pro, and the losses stopped. In 1985, alone, he fought 15 times. 15 professional fights in one calendar year. That number alone tells you something. His opponents weren't cupcakes. They were professional fighters. They just weren't ready. The average fight lasted under 2 minutes. Most opponents didn't make it to the second.
He hit him again. He did it again. Mike Tyson has beaten Evander Holyfield for the second time, and it is all out war.
Round. Some didn't see the first round out. The boxing world was starting to pay attention, and some of them were already starting to get nervous. To understand why experienced men who had fought their whole lives, were afraid of Mike Tyson, you have to understand what it felt like to stand across from him. Most heavyweight fighters of that era stood around 6'2", 6'3". They were accustomed to using their reach, their size, their jab to control distance. Tyson was 5'10". In the heavyweight division, that's short. That should be a disadvantage. But Cuss had built that disadvantage into a weapon. Tyson didn't fight from the outside. He refused to. He'd pressure forward, head moving side to side, slipping punches while cutting off the ring. And when he got inside, he was throwing from angles bigger men couldn't reach. Because when you're shorter than your opponent, your hooks come up at the chin from below. His uppercuts traveled a shorter distance, but landed with compounding torque. Former opponents described it the same way, over and over again. You knew it was coming. You just couldn't stop it. It felt like getting hit by a car. I've never been hit that hard in my life. But physical power was only part of it. The psychological element was what truly separated Tyson from anything the sport had seen. He would stare at opponents at the weigh-in with those eyes, empty, cold, utterly without warmth. He once said, "I try to catch my opponent on the tip of the nose because I try to push the bone into the brain." He said this in an interview, casually, like he was discussing the weather. Fighters heard that. They went home and thought about that. And some of them called their managers the next morning. November 22nd, 1986. Mike Tyson was 20 years old. His opponent, Trevor Berbick, WBC heavyweight champion of the world, the man who had ended Muhammad Ali's career just 5 years earlier. Berbick was no pushover. He was big, durable, experienced. The fight lasted 1 round and 35 seconds of the second. Berbick went down once, got up, went down again, and then, in one of the most surreal moments in boxing history, Berbick's legs stopped working. He tried to stand, and his body wouldn't cooperate. He spun, staggered, hit the canvas again. The punch had scrambled something, not just physically. Mike Tyson was the new WBC heavyweight champion. At 20 years old, the youngest heavyweight champion in history, a record that stands to this day. But here's what people forget. That wasn't the peak. The peak was what came next. By the time Tyson was 22, he had unified the heavyweight titles. WBC, WBA, IBF, all 3 belts undisputed. And the phone stopped ringing. Not because there were no heavyweight contenders. There were plenty. The problem was that none of them wanted to fight Mike Tyson. Promoter Bob Arum, one of the most powerful men in boxing, later admitted that getting opponents for Tyson during that period was an exercise in frustration. Fighters would agree in principle. Then the contract would arrive. And suddenly, the injury, the scheduling conflict, the family situation. One opponent's team reportedly asked for 100% of the purse up front before they'd even agree to negotiations. Larry Holmes, a former champion, a man who had never been accused of lacking courage, said that fighting Tyson was something he wasn't prepared to do in the way the public expected. Holmes was 38 at the time. He eventually did fight Tyson and went down in the 4th. But the hesitation said everything. Michael Spinks, the only man to hold both the light heavyweight and heavyweight titles, was paid an enormous sum to fight Tyson in 1988. He lasted 91 seconds. Afterward, Spinks's promoter Butch Lewis admitted that Spinks had been terrified walking to that ring. that the fear had been visible in his dressing room. 91 seconds. For a man who'd been a legitimate world champion. This was the reality of Mike Tyson at 22. He wasn't just beating opponents. He was ending them, psychologically, professionally, in some cases permanently. The sport had never experienced anything like it. There's one more layer to the story that most people skip. Cus D'Amato died in November 1985. Tyson was 19. He had just gone professional. He was barely into his career. And the man who had rescued him, raised him, shaped him, was gone. Tyson once said, "Without Cus, I would have been nothing. I would have been dead or in jail." What followed was a fighter who carried everything D'Amato had built: the technique, the pressure, the psychological warfare. But now, without the one person who could manage what lived inside him. The next few years were the most dominant stretch of heavyweight boxing in the modern era. And they were also the beginning of an unraveling that would take years to fully play out. But in those years, 1985 to 1988, from 18 to 22 years old, Mike Tyson was the most dangerous man on the planet. And the sport of boxing looked around and had to say something it had never said before. We don't have anyone left to put in front of him. History remembers champions for their wins. But the truest measure of Mike Tyson at 22 isn't the record.
Trying to play that strategy too,
35-0. It isn't the 3 belts. It isn't the knockouts. It's the phone calls
Steve,
that were
he's
never
trying
made.
to push Mike back.
The contracts that were never signed. The fighters who looked in the mirror and decided, not tonight. That's the legacy of Tyson in those years. He didn't just beat the opposition, he eliminated the will to oppose him. And in the history of heavyweight boxing, no one, before or since, has done it quite like that.